The wind howled down from the Rockies like a living thing. Snow didn't fall gently here. It slashed sideways, driven hard enough to sting skin raw. A lone cabin squatted in the valley, its timbers dark with years of storms. Smoke curled from a chimney, but inside, the man who lived there felt no warmth. Elias Crow sat at a rough-hewn table, sharpening the edge of his hunting knife. His beard was streaked with gray, his hands calloused and scarred from decades of violence and survival. His eyes pale blue, like a glacier stared at nothing. He had once been a name whispered in saloons and wanted posters. Gunslinger, outlaw, tracker. He had spilled blood for money, for vengeance, sometimes for no reason at all. But those years were buried out here in the mountains. He thought he could silence them, but silence cut deeper than bullets. Nights dragged, broken only by the snap of firewood and the old ghosts that sat across the table from him. Men he had killed. Women he'd abandoned. His own brother, shot in a drunken quarrel. He rubbed his temples, then reached for the crumpled paper in his coat pocket. It was a contract, hastily scrawled by the broker in town. One widow, strong and able, to cook, clean, and keep house through the winter. Paid in advance. Delivered a cabin at Elk Valley. Elias had thought nothing of it. He didn't want company. He didn't want conversation. He wanted food, cooked, chores done, and the silence to stay unbroken. But when the sound of hooves reached through the storm that afternoon, something in him tightened. He stood at the door, rifle in hand, snow whipping at his face. The stagecoach emerged through the curtain of white like a phantom. Its wheels ground to a stop in front of the cabin, and the driver jumped down, hauling open the door. Out stepped not the sturdy, weather-worn woman Elias had pictured. Instead, she was young, pale, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the weather. Her hair, dark as river stone, clung damp to her cheeks, and she carried herself with careful slowness, one hand resting on the swell of her belly. A pregnant widow. Elias's jaw hardened. "You're not what I paid for." The woman lifted her chin, despite the cold that painted her lips blue. "My name is Clara Whitfield, and you'll mind your manners, sir, seeing as you invited me here." The stage driver muttered something about roads closing and tipped his hat before hurrying off. Within seconds, the coach was swallowed by the storm, leaving only the two of them standing in the endless white. Elias growled under his breath and pushed the cabin door open. "Well, get inside before you freeze to death." The warmth hit Clara's cheeks, but it was a bleak kind of warmth. The cabin was bare, walls stripped of decoration, floorboards swept clean of anything resembling comfort. A table, 2 chairs, a rifle rack, and a pile of pelts in the corner. It was a house, but it wasn't a home. Clara laid her hand against her belly, feeling the little kick inside. Her child stirred when she was nervous, and Lord help her, she was nervous now. "You're with child," Elias muttered, throwing another log into the fire. "That wasn't in the agreement." "My husband passed 3 months ago," Clara said evenly. "The broker knew. Perhaps he didn't tell you because he knew you'd send me away." Elias turned on her, ice in his stare. "You can't cook and work heavy with that belly. I paid for strong hands." "And you'll have them," Clara snapped back. "I may be with child, but I'm no porcelain doll. I scrub, I sew, I cook. I didn't come here to be pitied, Mr. Crow." He blinked at her defiance. Few had ever spoken to him like that. Not outlaws, not lawmen, not even his own kin. "You'll sleep there," he muttered, pointing to the corner where a cot sat folded against the wall. "We keep to ourselves. No chatter, just work." Clara straightened her shawl. "And what about kindness, Mr. Crow? Does that fit in your rules?" His silence was answer enough. The storm deepened, rattling the cabin walls as night fell. Elias sat by the fire, methodically cleaning his rifle. Clara worked quietly, preparing a stew from dried venison and beans she found in his stores. The smell filled the cabin, warm and homely, so out of place in Elias's life that it unsettled him. When she set the bowl in front of him, he muttered, "Didn't ask for this." "You didn't have to," Clara said. "A man's got to eat." They sat in silence, the crackle of fire and the hiss of wind their only company. But then Dash howling got low, distant at first, but unmistakable. Wolves. Elias stiffened. His rifle leaned against the wall, always within reach. "Stay inside," he ordered, rising to his feet. But Clara stood too, hand steadying herself against the table. "I've heard wolves before. I know how close they sound when they're hungry. You're not stepping outside," he barked. "Try to stop me." Elias's glare burned, but something in her voice, the same quiet steel she'd carried since she stepped off that coach, told him arguing was useless. He shoved open the door, snow whipping inside. Out in the dark, pairs of yellow eyes glimmered. Between the trees, the pack circled, growls rumbling low in their throats. Elias lifted his rifle. His finger tightened. Behind him, Clara stood at the threshold, a shotgun in her arms. She had found it by the door, loaded and ready. Her shawl whipped in the wind, but her stance was firm. "You take the left," she said. "I'll guard the door." Elias glanced back at her. This woman, this fragile, pregnant widow stood in the snow, weapon-braced, firelight flickering in her eyes. He didn't say it aloud, but the thought burned through him. Maybe she wasn't what he paid for. Maybe she was something more. The wolves surged closer. Elias raised his rifle, and the night exploded. The night split with gunfire. Elias's rifle cracked, the blast echoing through the valley. A wolf yelped and crumpled into the snow. The rest of the pack snarled, shadows flashing between trees. Their yellow eyes gleamed in the firelight spilling. From the cabin door, Elias's breath plumed white in the bitter air as he worked the bolt, chambering another round. His heart pounded, steady as a war drum. This was what he knew: violence, blood, survival. It was all he had left. Another wolf lunged, teeth bared. Elias fired again. Snow burst red behind him. Clara braced the shotgun against her shoulder, her swollen belly straining against the shawl. The storm cut across her face, but she didn't blink. When a wolf darted for the door, she pulled the trigger. The recoil rocked her back, but the blast ripped through the night. The wolf fell twitching in the snow. Elias turned, astonished. "You've fired a gun before?" Clara's eyes blazed. "My husband was a preacher, Mr. Crow, not a fool. We lived on the frontier. I learned what I had to." The wolves hesitated now, circling, snarling. Elias chambered his last round. "Stay sharp," he muttered. But then, as suddenly as they had come, the pack slunk back into the trees. Their cries drifted into the distance, swallowed by the storm. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Elias lowered his rifle. Clara lowered the shotgun, her hands trembling. For a moment she swayed. Elias crossed the snow and caught her elbow before she fell. "Careful," he muttered. She steadied herself, pride stiffening her spine. "I told you, I'm not porcelain." He let her go, confused by the fire in her. Most women he'd known had been either hard as stone or soft as butter. This one was something else entirely. When dawn broke, the storm had eased, leaving the world buried in white silence. The wolves were gone, their tracks disappearing into the trees. Elias went about his chores, chopping wood, checking his traps, while Clara moved through the cabin. But something was different. She hung a rag over the window to keep out drafts. She swept the floor with a broken broom and tucked fresh kindling by the hearth. She found Elias's tin plates, never once washed properly, and scrubbed them with melted snow until they shone. When Elias returned, arms full of logs, he stopped in the doorway. For the first time in years, the cabin lived in. "What are you doing?" he asked, suspicion in his voice. "Turning this place into a home," Clara said simply. He set down the logs with a thud. "This is a cabin, not a parlor." Clara smiled faintly, rubbing her belly. "Even cabins need warmth, Mr. Crow, especially for a child." Elias muttered something under his breath and busied himself stacking wood, but inside something twisted. He had lived in this place for 3 winters, surrounded by silence and ghosts. It had never once occurred to him that it could be different. Days fell into a rhythm. Clara cooked meals, simple stews, biscuits baked over the coals, salted venison, softened in broth. Elias found himself eating more than he ever had, not because of hunger, but because it tasted of something he had long forgotten. Cared out at night, she lit a stub of candle and murmured prayers over the food. Elias never joined in. He sat in silence, eyes fixed on the flames, but something in the soft cadence of her voice gnawed at him. One evening, as snow battered the shutters, Clara caught him watching her fold a wool blanket neatly, corners tucked. "Just so. Never seen a man scowl at a blanket before," she teased. He grunted. "Blankets are for warmth, not for pretty." "They're for both," she said with a little smile. "Grace is in the small things." He didn't answer. But that night, when she had gone to sleep on her cot, Elias tried folding his own blanket. It came out crooked, clumsy. He cursed under his breath, then tried again. Clara carried her grief like a stone in her pocket, always there, but hidden until she chose to touch it. One night, when the wind howled too loudly for sleep, she spoke. "My husband's name was Samuel. He preached in a town called Willow Creek. Gentle man, soft-spoken. He died when fever came through last autumn. He never got to see his child." Her voice cracked, just a little. She pressed her hand to her belly. "Sometimes I think the child will never know him either. That's the cruelest part." Elias stared into the fire. For once, he didn't want. Silence. He wanted to tell her something, anything, but his throat closed. Finally, he said, "I had a brother once. Name was Daniel. We fought together, hunted together. Then whiskey, cards, bad blood. One night, I put a bullet in him." Clara's eyes widened. "Your own brother?" Elias's jaw clenched. "Never meant to, but the whiskey meant otherwise. I buried him myself. Haven't touched a bottle since." The fire snapped between them. Clara's gaze softened, not with pity, but with something Elias hadn't seen in years, understanding. For all her grief, Clara carried sparks of humor. One morning, she caught Elias fumbling with a skillet, trying to fry bacon. "You planning on burning the cabin down, Mr. Crow?" she asked, laughter bright in her voice. He scowled. "Bacon's bacon. It don't need fussing." She plucked the skillet from his hands. "It needs turning before it turns to coal." When she handed him a crisp, perfectly cooked strip, he chewed, grumbling. But inside, he felt something unfamiliar tugging at his mouth. A smile dot by midwinter. Supplies ran low. Elias counted the flour, beans, and salt pork, jaw tight. "We'll need to ride to the trading post," he said. Clara pulled her shawl tighter. "And I'm coming. You're not. Roads are rough, snow deep. You're heavy with child." Her chin lifted. "I won't sit in your cabin like some useless ornament. I can ride. I've done it before." He cursed under his breath. "Stubborn woman." "Strong woman," she corrected Dot in the end. He relented. The next morning, they saddled his mare, and Elias lifted her carefully onto the saddle before climbing. Up behind her, her back pressed against his chest, and though neither spoke of it, the warmth between them cut through the icy air. The trading post was a rough log, building crouched against the edge of the river. Inside, the smell of tobacco and wet wool hung thick. Men huddled by the stove, eyes following Clara as she entered. A woman that far into pregnancy was a rare sight on frontier roads. Elias's hand hovered near his revolver as he collected flour, coffee, and bullets. He didn't like the way the men looked at her. One of them, a broad-shouldered drifter with a scar across his cheek, grinned. Didn't think Crow was the marrying kind. She's not, Elias started, but Clara cut him off. Better watch your tongue, sir, she said sharply, fire in her voice. My husband was a better man than you'll ever be, and the child I carry will be too. The drifter laughed, raising his hands in mock surrender. Elias's blood boiled, but Clara's words had silenced the room. For the first time, Elias realized she didn't need his protection, not in the way he had imagined. They left the post at dusk, saddlebags full. Snow crunched beneath the Mare's hooves as the sky bled into twilight. The air carried that heavy stillness Elias knew too well, like the pause before a knife fight. Halfway through the pass, he heard it. A twig snapped. Hold, he muttered dot shadows. Moved among the rocks. Two figures stepped out, rifles raised. Their faces were gaunt, eyes wild with hunger and desperation. Drop the packs, one snarled. Leave the horse. Walk away, Crow. Elias shifted in the saddle, his hand brushing the revolver on his hip. Clara's breath caught, but her voice stayed steady. We have nothing worth killing for. Then you're blind, woman, the outlaw sneered. Crow's worth killing for. Every man in these parts knows he's sitting on outlaw money. Elias's stomach twisted. The past he'd tried to bury was clawing its way back. The outlaws cocked their rifles. Clara gripped Elias's arm. Don't let the child see blood. Tonight, she whispered, but it was too late. The valley erupted with gunfire. The first rifle shot split the silence of the pass. Snow puffed up beside the Mare's hooves. The animal reared, shrieking, nearly unseating Clara. Elias moved like lightning. His revolver was in his hand before the echo faded. He shoved Clara low against the saddle, his body shielding hers. Stay down, he barked. The outlaws moved from the rocks, two desperate men, lean as wolves, their eyes wild with hunger and greed. One carried a battered rifle, the other a revolver with its barrel worn silver from years of use. Crow, the scar-faced one shouted. Word is you're sitting on gold from your outlaw days. You ain't walking out of this pass without leaving it behind. Elias's jaw clenched. His past followed him like a curse. I buried that life, he growled. The man sneered. Ben will bury you. The outlaw fired. Elias's revolver barked in reply, the shot so close it burned his ear. A bullet slammed into the snow near Clara's leg, sending up a spray of ice. She cried out, clutching her belly. Rage roared through Elias. He leapt from the saddle, rolling. Behind a drift, returning fire with brutal precision. One outlaw staggered back, clutching his shoulder, blood painting the snow. The other advanced, revolver drawn. Come on, Crow. You ain't the legend folks whisper about. Just an old man hiding in the hills. Elias's pale eyes narrowed. In that moment, he was no hermit, no broken soul. He was the man he had been, the one men feared, the one who never missed. He rose from cover, firing twice in quick succession. The outlaw fell, his revolver tumbling from frozen fingers. The valley went still. Elias's chest heaved. Steam rose from his body, his hands steady on the smoking revolver. But Clara's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. Elias, Elias, he spun. Clara was doubled over in the saddle, her face pale as the snow, sweat beading on her brow. Despite the cold, her hand clutched her belly. My time. She gasped. The child's coming. Elias felt the ground drop beneath him. Bullets, blood, wolves, these, he understood. But this? This was a battlefield he had never faced. He scrambled into the saddle behind her, kicking the mare into a desperate gallop. The horse plunged through drifts, snow spraying from its hooves. Clara moaned, her body rigid with pain. "Hold on." Elias urged, his voice raw. "We'll make it." The cabin loomed at last, dark against the white. Elias half dragged, half carried Clara inside, laying her on the cot by the fire. She cried out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. "You?" "You'll have to help me," she gasped. Elias's heart hammered. "I don't, Clara. I don't know how. You've taken lives," she panted. "Now help me bring one into this world." The words struck him like a bullet. He swallowed hard, nodding once. The hours blurred. The storm outside howled, as if the mountains themselves bore witness. Inside, Elias knelt at Clara's side, fetching water, cutting cloth, holding her hand when the pain racked her body. She screamed, sweat soaking her hair, but her eyes never lost their fire. "You can do this," Elias whispered hoarsely, though his own hands shook. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." And then, with one final cry, it happened. The wail of a newborn cut through the cabin. Elias froze. In his blood-stained hands lay something he had never thought to hold again, a tiny child, red-faced and squalling, fists clenched against the cold world. He stared, breathless. This wasn't death. This wasn't violence. This was life. Clara collapsed back against the pillow, tears streaming down her cheeks. Is it a boy?" Elias whispered. His voice cracked. "A strong one." He wrapped the child in a clean rag and placed him gently in Clara's arms. She wept openly now, cradling her son. Elias sat back, trembling. His hands that had ended so many lives had just helped deliver one. For a few brief hours, peace filled the cabin. The fire glowed warm. The storm muted outside. Clara rocked the baby, humming a soft tune. Elias watched, silent, a strange ache filling his chest. But peace never lasted long for Elias Crow-dotted dawn. Hoofbeats thundered in the distance. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, the cold biting his lungs. Across the white valley, dark figures. Rode. 5 men, torches flaring in the wind. They weren't strangers. He recognized their leader instantly, Jed Carroll, an old outlaw who had once ridden with Elias in darker times. His face was cruel, twisted by greed and years of survival. "Crow!" Yet's voice boomed across the snow. "Word is you're hidin' more than a woman and a whelp in that cabin. Word is you're sittin' on outlaw gold, and we've come to collect." Elias's stomach nodded. The rumors. They had spread dot behind him. Clara appeared in the doorway, the baby swaddled in her arms. Fear shone in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "What will you do?" she whispered. Elias's pale eyes hardened as he loaded his rifle. The man who had once buried his past in silence was gone. Now, with Clara and the child behind him, he felt the weight of something greater than survival. "I'll do what I must," he said. The riders fanned out, torches blazing, voices jeering. The snow reflected their firelight, casting long shadows across the valley. Clara touched his arm. "You don't fight alone anymore." Elias swallowed hard, his chest tight. 4 years he had been a mountain of stone, hollow and cold. Now, because of her, because of the child, he felt something he thought long dead. A reason to live, a reason to fight. He stepped forward, rifle in hand, snow crunching beneath his boots. The mountains held their breath, and the blood that was about to be spilled would write a new chapter in the legend of Elias Crow. Snowmelt poured down the Rockies, turning the creeks into roaring ribbons of silver. Spring had arrived, painting the valley with life. Yet inside the mountain man's cabin, silence ruled. Ethan sat at the table, staring at the wood grain, shoulders heavy with an ache he didn't understand. The widow Clara wasn't at the hearth. She was outside, hanging linens on the rope strung between two pine posts. The baby, now a squirming, laughing little girl with curls as black as midnight, gurgled in her crib. Ethan had grown used to the sound, though he'd never admit it. He'd grown used to a lot of things. The smell of biscuits baking, the gentle hum of a lullaby drifting across the night, the soft touch of Clara's hand when she brushed past him, and he hated it. Not the things themselves, no, those he found himself craving. What he hated was how they reminded him of everything he'd lost: his wife, his child, the family he'd buried long ago. He stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. Clara, outside, looked up at the sound. Her eyes met his through, the small window steady, questioning. She didn't ask what troubled him. She never did. That was the infuriating part. She knew. That evening, a storm rolled in, wild and black, thunder splitting the sky like a rifle shot. Clara struggled with the shutters, wind whipping her hair into her face. Ethan grabbed the wood plank from her hand, fastening it down with a slam. "You'll get yourself killed out here," he barked. "I've lived through worse." She shot back, rain dripping from her chin. The storm howled, lightning cracking the ridge, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt the walls inside him shake. Clara wasn't fragile, as he'd imagined when she first stumbled into his life. She wasn't a burden he had paid for. She was a force, fierce, alive, unyielding. He found himself watching her fight the storm as though she'd been born of it. And in that wild moment, with thunder tearing the heavens apart, Ethan's defenses finally collapsed. Afterward, when the storm had passed and the cabin smelled of wet earth and smoke, Ethan sat by the fire. Clara joined him, the baby asleep. Against her chest, "You've carried grief longer than a man should," she said softly. He looked at her, eyes sharp. "And you think you know what that feels like?" She met his stare, unwavering. "I buried my husband. I've walked hungry so my child might eat. I've traded dignity for survival. Don't tell me I don't know grief." Her words sliced through him, leaving nothing to hide behind. For the first time, Ethan spoke of his own past, of the day he'd found his wife gone cold, of the child he never got to bury because the earth was too frozen. His voice cracked, and he hated it, but Clara didn't flinch. She laid her hand on his, steady, strong, and for the first time in years, Ethan did not pull away. The weeks that followed were different. The chores remained the splitting of logs, the hunting of elk, the tending of traps, but the silence between them softened. Clara laughed more. Ethan found himself listening for it. The baby's first steps turned the cabin into a battlefield of joy. Clara clapping, Ethan pretending not to smile, though the corners of his mouth betrayed him. Then came the rider. Dust rose on the trail, a lone figure cutting through the valley. Ethan's hand went to his rifle, instincts sharp. The man wore a deputy's badge, iron gleaming in the sun. "Ethan Calloway," the deputy said, reining in. "There's talk in town. They say you've got a woman living up here. A widow." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What's it to you?" The deputy glanced at Clara, then at the child. "Word is she was promised work in town. Folks are saying you bought her like a mule, somewhat to drag her back." The old Ethan, the Ethan before Clara would have let the words roll off, would have sent the man away with a threat. But now he felt something fierce rise in his chest. Clara's voice was calm, but her hand trembled. "I'll speak for myself." She stepped forward, chin high. "I came here by choice." This man gave me shelter when no one else would. I'm not leaving. Not for you. Not for anyone." The deputy's jaw tightened, but one look at Ethan's rifle, steady in his hands, and he tipped his hat. "Your choice then. Just don't expect the town to forget." Hooves thundered away, leaving the three of them in silence. That night, Clara approached Ethan by the fire. "You didn't have to stand up for me." "Yes, I did." His voice was low, rough. "You're not a debt I paid. You're not a cook I hired. You're more." The words came heavy, dragged from somewhere deep, but they were true. He expected her to laugh, to dismiss him. Instead, she set the baby in the cradle and turned back to him. "And you're more than the ghosts you carry," she said. "You just don't see it yet?" Ethan stared into her eyes, and for the first time since he'd buried his family, he saw not death, but life waiting to be lived. Seasons passed. The baby grew. The mountains thawed and froze again. Ethan and Clara found a rhythm that was no longer survival, but something greater. He taught the child to walk on stone paths. Clara taught him to laugh without shame. Grace had come to him, not through prayer, not through whiskey, not through solitude, but through a woman who had lost everything and yet still chose to give. And in the stillness of a mountain dawn, Ethan realized the truth. He had not paid for a widow to cook for him. He had been given a family, one forged not by blood, but by choice. And so the mountain man, who once thought himself beyond saving, found grace in the hands of a woman and the laughter of a child. Sometimes what we think we're buying is only the beginning of what's freely given. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because out here in the Wild West stories live on only if we keep telling them.